What's going on, everybody? It's your Route 1 Encounter, Yubari Eradicate, back with episode 4 of our Design Deck series. A series where we will be drawing every single Pokemon in the Pokedex, no matter how little we have to say about some of them. Speaking of little to say about Pokemon, today the subject of our discussion will be the Caterpie evolutionary line. Beginning with Caterpie itself. A lovely little Pokemon that I think is relatively underrated. You hear a lot of people talk about Butterfree, and Metapod is its own kind of little meme, I guess. But I don't know. I feel like Caterpie gets kind of underrepresented a lot. And I think that's slightly exemplified by how I botched this without reference drawing. I kind of created my own little pseudo Pokemon Green sprite. Everyone knows like Mew's horrific fetus sprite. I feel like that's what I did to Caterpie here. I made its mouth section like far too long. It's more of a little beak than anything, and yeah, it's weird eyes, and I gave it too many feet. But I think I got the important parts of it down, which are like its big shoulder pad kind of body segments. I also just completely forgot what Butterfree's wings look like. I was like, yeah, it's something like this. But yeah, these are three that we're all pretty familiar with in the same ways. I would assume, because these are Pokemon you find in Viridian Forest early on in the game in Red and Blue. Although I know a lot of people didn't play Red and Blue actually. Like the longer time goes on and the more new people get into Pokemon, the more and more I hear of people who didn't play the original games, who started in like 3rd gen or started in Soul Silver or started in I've heard people started in X and Y before too. But even so, these Pokemon appear a lot throughout the franchise. Even in Sword and Shield, where Beedrill got excluded, at least for the initial release of the game, Butterfree's still in there, and Butterfree got its own Gigantamax form, which is super cool. A fun little reference to Mothra, who is wonderful. Love Mothra. Absolute queen. But yeah, while I am familiar with these Pokemon, of course, I had never really looked into them too much. And since I only used them for a short amount of time in each of the games, I never really took the time to look at their Pokedex entries either. So pretty much all I know about them is from, looking at them and using them, or whatever might have been mentioned in the anime. What I did not know about Caterpie is that its crest or horn thing is actually called an osmeterium. And an osmeterium is the organ that caterpillars use to secrete a stinky fluid. They're like ladybugs, where they shoot out stinky goo when they're under attack to escape their attackers. So that's what that is. But another defensive tactic that caterpillars and moths and butterflies like to use is patterns that look like eyes on their bodies. And Caterpie's Pokedex entry says that it has eye-shaped patterns on its head to ward off predators. And that's concerning to me because I had never considered that those were not its actual eyes on its head. And now that I'm considering that and where its real eyes would have to be, maybe it doesn't have eyes. Because worms don't have eyes, right? But I don't know if caterpillars do. But if they don't have eyes, I don't actually know. I'm realizing now as I'm talking about it, I don't actually know how caterpillars get around if they can't see. Because I know that moths and butterflies are sometimes born without, when they become moths, there are certain moths that don't have digestive systems or that don't have mouths because they are only in that state for the purpose of breeding, and then they just starve to death in a week. So it's entirely possible they just don't have eyes. But I think it would be a lot spookier if its eyes were in that little black part underneath its like nose mouth kind of thing. Because I don't know what's up there. I don't know if that's supposed to be black, or if it, like, I don't know if it's black flesh up in there, or if that's like a hole. And the way it stands up in its artwork, it makes me wonder if maybe it's looking out from that little dark patch. Very horrible to think about. Very awful to think about. As I'm trying to convince you that this is a cuter Pokemon than you've ever, given it credit for, I'm also offering the idea that maybe it's also like one of the worst things you've ever seen. But yeah, I think Caterpie's, it feels weird to say it's an effective design because it is so simple and it is just doing what it needs to do. But as far as, Caterpillar kind of Pokemon go, you could go a lot more generic than Caterpie. It's got its big head that's kind of helmet shaped in a way. With its big shoulder pad, like I mentioned earlier. I always look at them as like shoulder pads. Because I think it might be in the anime when Caterpie uses Tackle and it does that big charging rush across the field. That kind of, I don't know, that kind of portrayed to me that was what those were for. Was that the bigger segments on the top of its body were sort of for throwing its weight around in specific ways. But yeah, I really did get attracted to Caterpie. I noticed its cuteness in the anime when Ash caught his in I think it's the second or third episode. But the Caterpie kind of hugging on Misty, and then it's like, oh, it's so cute, and then she rejects it because it's a bug. And then you feel bad for the little guy. And then it befriends Pikachu, and they're talking about, hopes and dreams and stuff in the middle of the night, and I can't understand what they're saying, but it's heartwarming whatever the fuck they're saying. And so that was on rewatch recently. I was like, you know what? Caterpie is actually super cute Pokemon. I love that little guy. And I do think it is effective at what it needs to be. I think it's a little bit above what it needs to be. I also think that its little tail thing is neat because it kind of looks like an exclamation point. And with the idea that it would use its what the fuck's that thing called again? I'm gonna double check again. It's Osmatarium. The idea that it would use its organ to create that sort of noxious fluid to run away, it makes the exclamation point kind of seem like a Metal Gear, like enemy spotted kind of thing. So I think it's kind of funny. And I think that the big splash of red on its head is something I really appreciate about it too. It's nice when it has, a Pokemon with a little bit of something that stands out. I think that carries over into Butterfree as well, even though I don't think Butterfree was originally supposed to be part of this line, which I'll mention when I get to Butterfree. But Butterfree's got its big red eyes, which stand out against all of its other similar colors. Caterpie, it goes without saying, but Caterpie's got two primary colors, and then it's bright red crest, whereas Butterfree, I fumble over that all the time. Butterfree has its primary purple and blue with its splash of red, and then its sort of white backdrop with its wings behind it. But the Metapod here is just all green. I think that's always kind of why I've never really paid much attention to Metapod, because it's kind of it's a boring Pokemon just by nature. Especially right here. I was having problems posing these three because Caterpie doesn't have limbs. Caterpie just has little suction cup feet. And they're cute, and I would love to to pinch them and fucking mess with them like a little cat or something. I think they're precious little feet. But, you can't do a lot with them. So I think it's a Gen 4 sprite of Caterpie where it's just kind of like, hopping around or whatever. And I was like, yeah, that would be good. It's like how last time when I grabbed the Wartortle sprite. I was like, yeah, can't think of a pose, go for a sprite. I think it's a good philosophy. But Metapod doesn't have any limbs at all. It has no extremities whatsoever. And so I started drawing it, and I was like, I can't make it the exact same pose, because it's just going to look like I might as well have just traced it, But I was like, you know what? There's not much else I can do with it, and I think people will understand if I just draw Metapod being Metapod. Because I actually sat here for like way too long looking at it, being like, what can I actually do with this thing? And my conclusion was not much. Its body shape is kind of strange as well. It changes a lot depending on who's drawing it and where. It's like its little cracks and stuff are inconsistent to say the least in a lot of its sprites and artwork and everything. But I think they've kind of settled on, with the 3D model at least, they've settled on it's got three kind of little spikes on it. It's got one big spike on its back that kind of makes it look like... I always thought it was a nose. I always thought it looked like a weird moon face with a nose, which is why I didn't like it as a kid. But so it has that one spike on its back and it had two little spikes on the sides. But other than that, it's just, yeah, not a whole lot going on with Metapod. I decided I had to make it shiny here because, you know, to differentiate it a little bit at least. But the spooky fact I found out about Metapod was the Pokedex mentions that its body is soft and tender inside, which just makes me envision like Metapod as being hollow with a little meaty pink Caterpie just jangling around in there while like pincers are trying to kick its ass, you know. Also, I added those highlights to Caterpie's eyes because I thought, you know, might need to give him a little more life in his eyes, make him more presentable and stuff, you know. But then now realizing that those might not be its eyes, I may have wasted that effort. But let's hope I'm wrong. I would love to be wrong about this. Butterfree. I think Butterfree is also very effective at what it needs to do, because it would be really easy to make just a bug, especially with you know, butterflies have really pronounced features that are kind of, you know, they really differentiate them. Primary one being the proboscis, of course, their little drinky straw that they have as a mouth. The fact that we went without a proboscis on a butterfly Pokemon up until like what? Like Mothim kind of has one, but it's really what's it called? Beautifly. Beautifly in Gen 3 is really that's the first. Well, no, Mothim's after that, isn't it? I don't know why I started that sentence thinking that Butterfree or Beautifly rather was like 4th gen or something like that, but yeah, Beautifly. Beautifly is closer to what I would have expected for an early butterfly Pokemon, but instead we got this cute little fat little mushy guy. Whose Pokedex entry says that it collects pollen using the hair on its legs, and I take issue with that because I don't know if I would call those legs. They look like big Kirby feet to me, and I don't see any hair. Granted, I don't want to see any hair, but I'm just saying it sounds like a dex description written for Beedrill that was put in the wrong place and that they just kind of kept going with. Because I don't think Butterfree build like beehives or anything like that, and so I don't know where they would take that pollen unless they're just like sniffing it on their free time. But yeah, as a kid I always thought the Butterfree was a psychic type because it learns Psywave and what's the other one? It learns Confusion and Psywave really early on. And so I always thought it was cool for that because I just think it's cool when Pokemon learn moves that don't fit their typing. Like, I think the primary example is like Incineroar. I think it's really cool because it learns Outrage. And something about, you know, a fire dark type learning a dragon type move. There's something, it's always dragon type moves too. Because Whiscash getting Dragon Dance, I'm just like, yeah, give everybody a dragon type move just cuz, you know? I think it's cool. Wartortle and Blastoise get Dragon Pulse. It's weird, but it's like, it's just interesting to me. Especially because dragon is such a strange like type in implication. I feel like dragon type can mean a lot of things. But yeah, so I always as a kid I was like, oh, it must be a psychic type because, you know, kids are dumb. But I think I like it being a. It's strange that it loses its bug typing because it becomes a poison flying type. I guess we already had a bug flying type in Scyther in Gen 1, but it is strange that your Route 1 bug type Pokemon loses its bug typing. But there are just a shit ton of poison types in Gen 1 too, so I mean, I guess it falls in line with all that. But Butterfree, God, why can't I say its name? That's crazy. That's insane. Butterfree, like I mentioned earlier, Butterfree was it's a pretty common theory, but it's something that bothers me a lot specifically. The idea that Butterfree was not originally the end of this line, sort of like how Blastoise was a different Pokemon that got adapted to be the final evolution of the Squirtle evolution line. Butterfree shares almost every single resemblance possible to Venonat, whereas Venomoth has a big fancy crest on its head, kind of like Caterpie, and it's got the big round eyes like Caterpie with the pupils in them, like Caterpie and Metapod, whereas Butterfree has the compound eyes. And Butterfree also shares the exact same color palette with Venonat, outside of its wings, obviously. But and the same antenna as well. So it's one of those ones that really bothers me in Gen 1, where it's this one and a couple things to do with the Golduck line, where it's just it's so apparent that it was something else that I'm surprised they didn't just fix it in Gen 2. But now here we are, like what? Is it 25 years later? 30 years later we're coming up on, or something like that? We're all this time later, and they just left it how it was. If it was a mistake, they just left it how it was. But I guess it's fine. Because, Butterfree it has that kind of sense of Pokemon have to look like they could be your friend. That's one of the main design aspects of Pokemon in general. And so I do think that Butterfree is more personable than Venomoth. So if they were going to have those lines, switch the other way, it would have been beneficial to have Venonat appear earlier on in Red and Blue. But I think that's just one of those things that bothers me aesthetically, but otherwise it's kind of whatever, because, gameplay mechanics, balancing and all that shit. But yeah, I was never in love with Butterfree. I think I liked it more as a kid because I had a little Burger King plush of Butterfree. And there was obviously the big dramatic anime episode that involved Butterfree and the pink Butterfree, which was the first alternate color Pokemon to ever show up in anything, I think. Which that's a first for Butterfree, where Caterpie also has a first, and one of its only things is that Caterpie is one of the only Pokemon to be shown evolving in a unique way. Because most Pokemon just glow, and then they just kind of morph into the other Pokemon. But Caterpie in that episode where the episode right before Ash fights Samurai, where Caterpie does its little silk strand shower and turns itself into a Metapod, and then the Metapod cracks open and the Butterfree comes out of it like an actual butterfly. Caterpie and Weedle, Beedrill, and Kakuna are those two lines early on were the only ones that had special evolution animations, and I think to this day they're pretty much the only ones that do it. I feel like in Sun and Moon, I think when Bounsweet evolves in the anime, when it evolves in the Steenie, they actually have they focus on it more so you can see the changes occurring. But for the most part, it really kind of ended with these guys. It started and ended with these guys. And then the only other thing, I guess, in terms of personal experience with these Pokemon is, as a kid, I always thought it was crazy how when Ash fights Samurai, the two nuts things about that episode were that Ash said a swear word because he said crap. And I remember me and my mom were like, damn, Ash is so cool and edgy. He said crap. He said a swear word. Bad word. That's why my mom liked that episode, because she likes swearing. It's something she's very fond of, which is where I pick it up. In case you guys didn't know. A little bit of Yubari lore for you guys. But yeah, that episode where he fights Samurai, and the Metapod hardens and breaks the pincer's vice grip, like shatters its like pinchers. I was like, damn, I hope he's all right, because sure, he was a bad guy, but that poor Pokemon. I'm assuming that they grow back eventually, because that would be rough for the pincer if its primary attack weapon could be broken by a Metapod and then never grew back. But outside of that, it's a Metapod, it's a Caterpie, it's a Butterfree. They're Pokemon that we all meet very early on. We spend a little bit of time with every game, and then we sort of move on to bigger, better things, but they're always there for us in the beginning, and so they deserve our appreciation. And Butterfree's a beautiful Pokemon. A beautiful Pokemon. So I think that is going to be it for this episode. Let me know how you guys feel about the Butterfree line. If you have any particular experiences, if you came across a shiny ever. I got a shiny Butterfree, or a shiny Metapod actually, in Let's Go Pikachu while I was shiny hunting for something else entirely. I think that's how I found most of my shinies. But I really love shiny Metapod actually, because it's like bright red, and it really, especially in Let's Go Pikachu with the overworld sprites, or the overworld encounters, they really a shiny Metapod really stands out in Viridian Forest against the green and everything. So I like that shiny a lot. I'm not a big fan of Butterfree shiny, but any shiny is cool to have. So, but yeah, if you guys have any special stories, if you have any preferences, if you like the Pokemon or dislike the Pokemon for any particular reason, feel free to let me know. Discuss in the comment section, and follow my Twitter account for the Design Decks Twitter account. I did actually get around to changing the @ I mentioned last time. I put a link to the account in the bio last time. I'll do it again this time. But I did actually change the handle, so now it is @Yubari Design Decks. Capital Y, capital D, capital D, double D. But that is the Twitter account where I'll be posting updates and the final art and the episodes when they go live. So if for whatever reason you don't have if you don't want to, hit the bell on the YouTube or whatever, or if YouTube decides to be unreliable at any point, I will be posting on that Twitter account. And from there, you know what? You can also go ahead and follow me on my main account or join the Discord, because I talk about that kind of stuff in there as well. But that's only if you're into that. Either way, I appreciate you guys watching, and I appreciate any future comments if you have any. I love reading them. And that's going to be all for me. So be cool, be wild, be groovy, and have a good night. Bye.